Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT ranked meta video. Today I'll be doing a review of the ranked meta for patch 12.8. We haven't seen any major shifts in the meta since 12.7. The largest change by far was Sivir being more in line with the rest of the top compositions, though she's still plenty strong. Beyond that, the pace of the game and the emphasis on flex play is about where it was before. We'll be trying a slightly different format by breaking down the meta into a few key talking points. While TFT is a complex game, simplifying it into key areas can help understanding the meta. The areas we'll be focusing on are items, pace of the game, meta compositions, augments, and then a brief summary of each stage of the game. All that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT shows and tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. As we often do with our ranked review, we're starting with the opening carousel and meta items. Items are the perfect place to begin when talking about the meta because it helps to set the tone for what types of compositions are doing well. For example, the current meta is focused on flex play, so there isn't any specific item or component that's way up in priority. Instead, it comes down to general player preference and whether the player leans more towards AP or AD boards. AD boards are still focused around three components: sword, glove, and of course the bow. For the opening carousel, we recommend any of those three components because auto attack carries tend to stabilize the easiest in the early game and have the smoothest transitions later on. Sword and glove build into Infinity Edge, sword and bow build into Giant Slayer, and glove and bow build into Last Whisper. All of those items are great to slam early if the player has an AD item holder like Ezreal, Talon, Gnar, or Senna. There are plenty of other playable items with those components, but by far the three we listed are the most common in the meta. Last Whisper definitely takes the overall cake for AD item priority because a lot of auto attack carries utilize it, like Sivir, Jhin, Draven, and Jace. Giant Slayer is a catch-all damage item, though it may not always get the bonus damage early in the game when health pools are so low. Infinity Edge is an okay item to slam, but it can be countered early by Bramble Vest. We recommend taking it with an assassin opener like Twitch or Talon. Let's now switch over to AP items, which are unfortunately a lot less flexible, at least in the early game. Rod is the best AP component off the beginning carousel because it builds into Morellonomicon, Locket, and Rageblade, but none of those are really that magic damage focused. Morellonomicon is worth investing into when you have a good early unit to hold it like Echo, but be careful slamming it without a unit to use it with. Tiers are important for AP champions, but generally slamming a tier item early like Shojin or Blue Buff won't do too much in the current meta. This isn't always the case, like Blue Buff on a VIP brand or Shojin on a VIP Syndra can be amazing openers, but they aren't reliable. There's no consistent AP item holder like there is AD items because a lot of the best ones are 3-cost units like Malzahar or Lucian. Opening with an AP item isn't going to put you behind necessarily, but it's more likely to be less useful in Stage 2 than AD items, which leaves us with flex components like Chain Vest and Belt. Both of these are great components to go for early because you can build plenty of defensive items like Bramble, Locket, Warbogs, or even Sunfire Cape. Frontline items are always going to be useful throughout the game regardless of what comp you're playing. Player preference generally trumps any specific item or component. Play to what your strengths are and build a board around the components you get. The top items to look for are Last Whisper, Giant Slayer, Morellonomicon, Bramble Vest, and Frozen Heart. In the late game, utility works best like Shroud or Zephyr, but also things like Chalice or Zeke's. Be willing to slam items when they make the most sense, but ultimately keep your options open when possible, since playing flex is the key to the current meta. Let's continue on into the next key area of the meta, the pace of the game. The pace of the game is mostly defined by where the majority of the players are spending gold. It's the simplified version, but to give an example, in the current meta, most players are aiming to hit level 7 and 8 and then roll into their compositions. This means the pace of the game is relatively slow because even though the early stages matter, there's far less pressure on the lobby during those stages. Comparatively, if the pace of the game was faster, there would be more power spikes in Stage 3, whether that's from low-cost reroll builds or just rolling on level 6 and 7 to stabilize. There have been a few metas like that, but recent metas since roughly 12.6 have been focused on the later stages of the game. The current meta focuses on Stage 4 and 5, which is where most of the rolling is done. Players aim for a standard level 7 timing on 4-1, though we often see 2 or 3 players leveling before then. Once level 7, some players do spend gold to stabilize with an item holder in frontline, but generally, the goal is to hit level 8 between 4-2 and 5-3, with the earlier timing being preferred. The slower the pace of the game, mixed with flex boards being common, means 4 and 5 cost units go up in value dramatically. There are a few reroll boards to aim for, but for the most part, they're non-existent in 12.8. Instead, aim for a 4-cost carry like Sivir or continue to level 8 and try to high roll a 5-cost unit like Victor, Kaisa, or Jinx. That's not to say you should ignore the early game entirely, because it is still important. It's just the focus for compositions is more towards the late game than it is the mid game. From the pace of the game, let's transition into meta comps. The defining aspect of the meta is, you guessed it, flex play. Flex essentially means not committing to any particular composition and instead playing what the game gives you based on items, augments, and champions. A lot of boards end up using similar champions like Orianna or Socialite champions like Seraphine simply because utility works wonders with any carry. Innovators are also quite common for flex boards. For example, if you're playing Draven, he benefits a lot from the Enchanter trait and shields that Orianna provides plus the CC that she brings. Then you could also add in Clockwork or maybe Socialite and Innovator. Basically anything goes with flex boards, but generally speaking they're focused more towards the late game. Find a random Kaisa at level 7? Well, time to pivot and build a board around her. Having a game plan is always good, but flex play players are able to bend their plan based on what the game gives them. For players looking for more defined compositions, there are quite a few. Renata Bruiser is still doing well and has one of the best late game transitions. The goal of this board is to hit Renata 2 as quickly as possible and throw a bunch of bruisers in front of her. With blue buff, Morel, and Omicron in a solid front line, Renata is easily able to carry your board to level 9, where Victor and Silco round out the comp. Mutants are still doing well and are more of a confined flexibility. Depending on the mutation, you can run any of Malzahar, Kaisa, or Kha'Zix as the carry. Just keep in mind, Malzahar and Kha'Zix tend to lack in scaling. Mutant emblems are quite good in general, especially with Synaptic Web for champions like Ahri or Victor. Overall, there are plenty of ways to run a mutant board, with the top 3 being Synaptic Web, Voracious, and Bio-Leeching. Another common composition is good old reliable Sivir. Sivir with Striker is the easiest board you can possibly play because everyone knows how to run Sivir at this point. We will say that Scrap did take a hit in the last patch, meaning that Scrap Striker isn't as consistent, but neither is Hextech. While forcing Sivir is certainly doable, for the best results, we would suggest not forcing the board unless you can easily hit 6 Striker. 6 Strikers is by far the easiest way to top 4 with Sivir, but again, there's other variations that can do well, just don't expect to win with them like in 12.7. Lastly, 5 cost champions. Victor, Kaisa, Jinx, Jace, and Zeri can all be played around as the main carry. Simply build a board with them and you're good to go. For the best chance at winning a lobby, we recommend eventually transitioning into 5 cost champions because they have the best scaling by far. For any reroll fans, sadly the meta just doesn't favor any of them currently. Some of the common ones are still being played but aren't all that reliable. We only recommend rerolling if you've high-rolled the champions early on in the game, otherwise it's better to transition into a more viable comp. Next up, let's talk about augments. Overall, the meta for augments hasn't changed a whole lot. At this point in set 6, most players are aware of what's good and what's not, so there isn't actually a ton of choice in regards to augments. For every augment stage, there's always one augment that's clearly better than the rest, whether that's because it's generally good or because it works the best for your comp. Stage 1-4 is where most of the decision making happens for augments because you have the most amount of wiggle room in that early game. This can be econ, combat, or utility focused augments. It mostly comes down to player preference. Econ augments have way more value on 1-4 than the other stages, but win streaking with a combat augment can be quite good. Scout to see where your board is compared to others and what augments are being taken to make the most informed decision. Stage 3-3 is a bit more rigid because econ augments tend to be ignored at this point in the game, though they can still be played. 3-3 is more about preparing for stage 4, so any augments that help with that are often the best. On stage 4-6, that's where you want to completely focus on augments that help your current board the most. This can be a boost to survivability, attack speed, damage, items, whatever your board needs the most, that's what you want on 4-6. All in all, the augment system is one of the best set mechanics that TFT has ever had, but balance has definitely been a major limiter. There's an illusion of choice as most of the time the best augment is fairly obvious, but don't sweat it over too much when you're picking. For our final section, we're going to quickly cover each stage of the game, beginning with the early game. Stage 2 is definitely one of the most important stages, so be sure you're focusing on doing well in this stage. The defining mechanic mostly comes down to streaking, whether that's win or lose. Ideally, every game you want either 5 win or 5 loss streak to maximize your gold gain, so make that a priority. This means learning good opening boards like Ezreal Innovator, 3-cost item holders like Lucian, or specific champions like VIP Brand. Girls and Mercenaries are the go-to for loss streaks, so whenever you can play either of those 2 traits, you know what to do. Focus on econ, saving health, and prepping for a mid-game transition to make the most out of the early game. The mid-game is mostly centered around stage 4. Stage 3 has the major decision of the 3-3 augment, but beyond that, leveling to 6, it's an easily skipped stage. Stage 4 and level 7 is where you want to stabilize by rolling as little gold as possible so that you can get to level 8 between 4-2 and 5-3. Once level 8, you want to roll and ideally play around whatever you hit with a flex board, but any of the meta compositions we talked about earlier can also be played as well. The overall goal in the mid game is to hit level 8, roll for a carry, and build a board around them to stabilize. Then there's the late game, which primarily focuses around stabilizing your level 8 board, playing 5 cost units and leveling to 9. Stabilizing, as mentioned, is finding your main carry and upgrading them while playing synergies that suit them best. 5 cost units also help with stabilizing. In particular, a unit like Silco is a great champion to play at level 8 and 9. There are 2 routes to go from at this point in the game, which will be around late stage 5 or early stage 6. First, continue rolling on 8 to hit upgrades, find 5 cost, and potentially roll for a 3-star 4 cost. Second, save gold and aim to level up to 9. Leveling to 9 is much more likely in the current meta than we've had in the past. Just keep in mind, you never want to lose the game with a bunch of gold. Either route is viable, it just depends on your board and the rest of the lobby. The only other aspect of the late game to focus on is, of course, scouting and positioning, which is where most of your attention should be at that point in the game. That's all for today's video, folks. This is the best time to climb for ranked when the meta has so much time to settle, given the lack of changes between 12.7 and 12.8. It looks like the next patch is going to be a wild one, so get your LP gains in now. Let us know in the comment section below what you're hoping they change in the next patch. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.